Hey, everybody. Welcome back. We've got another Thursday at night at home with Olympus, and we are very, very excited to see everyone again. Seeing lots of comments rolling in from everyone all over the world again. I'm very excited. We always have such a diverse crowd out there. So tonight, just to get a little basic housekeeping out of the way like normal, of course, we are recording this episode. So if you came in late, don't worry. You can always catch it on the replay. It'll be available to watch. We will be holding comments till the end, or questions, I should say, and bringing those up for a Q&A session at the end. So definitely save all your burning questions for that part. And tonight we have a very special guest, Olympus visionary Jay Dickman, who is amazing travel world Nat Geo photographer. And so I'm going to bring him on. We'll chat a little bit. So good afternoon, Jay. Where are you joining us from today?
Hi, Michela. I'm joining you from a rainy Denver, Colorado, where we're about 75 degrees. I hate to rub that in, mind you, but it's very comfortable here.
It's quite comfortable in Colorado. I'm a little jealous. You guys get rain. That's nice.
Yes, we've had a lot of that. So I hope you're doing well.
Yeah, just, warm. Anybody that was on last week knows how hot it is in Northern California. So I'm always out here dying in the heat to bring you the show.
Someone's got to do it. You're a true soldier to push on through.
So, Jay, what are we going to be talking about tonight?
Well, tonight we're going to be thanks everyone for joining us. I greatly appreciate your time. That's the most valuable thing you can give us. Tonight we're going to talk about that universal question of the universe. Which mode is the best for your photography? Program, shutter, aperture, manual. Nice.
Well, is it going to apply to how you shoot your images when you're out in the field?
Yeah, I'm gonna show some travel images. I'm gonna show to kind of start the presentation. I'll show some images, kind of explaining to people who I am photographically. It's funny, you'll hear me say this a lot. What's the best mode to shoot in? It depends, and I'll further that in a minute. But it'll hopefully make sense when I get talking about it.
Awesome. Well, we've got people from Australia waiting, New York, a bunch of people from the UK. It's very late there, guys. I appreciate you sticking it out with us tonight. So I'm going to let you get going so our poor UK friends can get to bed sometime in a decent hour. So I'll go ahead and pop up your slideshow for you. And I'm going to get out of the way. Again, we're going to answer some questions towards the end with Jay, and I'll let it go. Go for it, Jay.
Thanks, Michela. Yeah, I'm Jay Dickman. I'm an Olympus visionary photographer. I'm a longstanding Olympus visionary photographer. Been National Geographic photographer. Most of my work these days is actually with National Geographic expeditions and our own First Light workshops. Until this pandemic hit, my travel was very, very heavy. 2019 into the first month of 2020, it was 41 countries I shot in. So it's really busy. I do want to talk about this because this is a question I get all the time. Like, what exposure mode should I be shooting in? As if there were one that would cover all bases. I've been in the business for many years. That's me with an old friend of mine back in Dallas. I worked with newspapers for many, many years, and I love that whole process of the newspaper world because it was a little of everything you had to shoot. What I loved about it was the diversity of it. It was a little of everything you had to shoot. And I kind of always broken it down. There were three components of newspaper photography that made up the business. And it was feature, sports, and spot news. Feature was finding that picture to fill a space on the page in any situation of daily life. These two guys are waiting an introduction at a mystical and occult festival in Dallas. I just thought it was a funny picture. And this is one thing I found is that if you have a certain element, a certain emotion in a photograph, you connect with your audience that much more strongly. And it's working on those images with newspapers or with National Geographic or your own slideshow to stop that audience, to pull them into your world, to engage them. This was a Willie Nelson picnic, all these drunken, crazy people. during a rainstorm. There was broken glass in the mud and everything, but it was one of those images that I spun around and saw it shot. It was in manual mode. It says back in Tri-X film days. But again, you're trying to bring that power to that single image, often a single image that will engage your audience, that stops them when they're looking through the newspaper, the magazine, or looking at your slideshow. It's been proven that an audience gives your image about a half second of attention. You have to do something to engage them further. Humor was something I always found that would be it's a horrible copy of that, but trying to find those humorous moments where, this guy was diving off the lakehead picture, and just trying to find those pictures that said something to our audience. In sports, what I loved about sports, it was all about timing. You had this intense situation in a small field, and it came down to a moment. And I'll tell you what, moment drives everything in photography. You'll hear me say that a lot in this talk. And watching for those slightly different moments, I always tell people that if you see something that makes you go, wow, or makes you go, huh, or makes you stop, think about photographing it. This is what I love about photography. It's that constant challenge. It's always working through something. It's every frame is a new event. So you're watching, you're shooting, and that's where it kind of goes in. That exposure thing will go a little further. I was lucky to have won a Pulitzer Prize. These are a couple of the pictures from it. These were newspaper days. This was spot news. This is when you had something that was completely out of control, and you were just there to photograph it. This was a death squad victim in El Playon, and then an election day shootout that occurred when I was down there. So the diversity of, oh my gosh, you go from rock and roll stuff to sports to war, and then again to more rock and roll stuff. So I photographed Led Zeppelin on their first tour back in the late 60s. But these were all feature photographs for running the paper. It's amazing because these images now sell as fine art through galleries. You ought to look at it. It's called Morrison Hotel Gallery. They represent my work, but oh my gosh, they have some absolutely amazing work by other photographers. It's well worth a visit. Or it's Chuck Berry doing his famous duck walk. Moments are called that, as it's often a millisecond of opportunity we have for the photographer. What is it? 500th of a second. This is 250th of a second. But you watch for those moments where everything peaks and everything drops off. And this is a great manic depressive business because, it's just when you get it, it's like, oh, this is amazing. When you miss it, I'm sick of this. I'm going to go do something else. Or it's that picture of the Rolling Stones in a concert in Dallas where it was this torrential downpour and it's became this primeval looking scene. But it's those things where you constantly have that camera to your eye, you're watching. You can't get many pictures when the camera's down. And as Wayne Gretzky said, you're going to miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So, and digital's great because you can shoot all you want, but I also suggest people slow it down a little bit, really concentrate on watching for that moment. So this was some of the old newspaper stuff. Then in the late 80s, I started working with National Geographic. And one of my first stories for them was in Papua New Guinea. And it was this Stone Age village in which I lived for 3 months. And you really have to work hard on keeping focus on something. Geographic, when you get a story from them, probably 70% of your contract time is research. You do all your research, you build up all your knowledge of it, so you walk into the field ready to shoot this, so you have an understanding of what you're photographing. Same story. We went hunting for a cassowary. These are village dogs killing the cassowary. But it's staying there, staying involved, keeping your focus on the story and what's happening. And it's easy to get distracted, but you always come back to what's the core, what's the theme of my story. Then I did a lot of work with National Geographic books and others. I did a number of stories for the Yellow magazine, coverage for books on remote spots of the earth, the Aeolian Islands in Italy, which is really a wonderful, wonderful place. But again, what I try to do, I think what photographers do, that is when they're successful with an image, is they put their viewer into the photograph. You know what the place looks like. You know what the place feels like. You know what the place smells like. All these sensory components come to life when a photograph works. And trying to bring a different view to Angel Falls in Venezuela, tallest waterfalls on the earth, shot for another Geographic book. But when you get these images, and Geographic is a great publication to look at, or any other great publications, I suggest to photographers that they look at them to see, when you see a picture that really rings your bell, that resonates with you, break it down. Why is this picture working? That's incredibly important knowledge for you as an aspiring photographer, as well as a mature, educated photographer. I see people come out with stories in Geographic that the level just gets raised again, and it's just such an exciting business. You know, how do you convey the sense of a massive colony of bats emerging from Bracken Cave in Texas? Well, you shoot a manual exposure, little flash fill, overexpose the flash slightly because I wanted it to make the bats look ethereal. So you have a lot of these. Often you'll go into these situations with an image in mind's eye on how it should look. You can't lock yourself to that because sometimes life throws you a curveball. So you've got to move around to think about how to convey it differently. But this is, again, I love this process in photography. It's always this challenge. It's always this problem solving that's going on. Story I did for the magazine on a submarine. U.S. Navy had lent the submarine to a scientific program to research the floor of the Arctic Ocean. I actually spent a week on the sub, and it's a long story. I won't go into it. It was one of the most stressful shoots I've ever had. This was the sub surfacing through the ice. It was we love the moment of the ice falling off the sail on the USS Hawkbill. It was about 42 below zero working in this weather. And for those of you that have worked in really cold weather, you know those problems that it brings. And story I shot for the magazine on the Yukon River. I spent about 3 months, 4 months on this story in total. I split my contract over a year so I could go to the river at different times of the year. But you start building with that idea of, I've got to create a sense of place picture for my audience. I've got to create a moment. I've got to introduce my characters. I've got to introduce detail. And you got to close your story out. But we use this as a great big banner opener, fold out, which is always cool when you get one of those in Geographic. So you have this big, loud moment of this guy getting ready to harpoon a seal. It's a Yupik up in a very remote village on the Yukon River. And then another story I shot for the magazine. And talk about totally different, a quiet little moment. It's a story Ernest Hemingway had written a famous short story about in Upper Michigan Peninsula. So you have to create that sense of place, just for the nice little moment of the clouds, that thing. Or another story on a river system in Alaska, Tachinchini-Alsek. And I've done a lot of other work with Geographic. Like I said, most of my work these days is with Geographic expeditions. But we also break that up with our first flight workshops. And these are posters and pictures of the magazines we used to produce from the workshops. We do posters, but it gives you an idea. We do them internationally. We've got 2 coming up in Wyoming. They're sold out. We've got 1 coming up in Namibia next year that's sold out. We've got 1 coming up in the Inside Passage of Alaska, which is one of my favorite places. So anyway, so enough of that shameless self-promotion of my workshops and who I am. Let's get back to what this talk was about. The exposure modes on your camera. You know, these cameras are so sophisticated in their ability to create the correct exposure for you. I think which allows the camera to get out of the way. You know, it's interesting. If you look at that dial, you go from manual to program to auto. I didn't put auto on here because I want you to move on beyond auto, and I'll explain why in a minute. But it's interesting because manual, you take control of everything, and there's a continuum to full automatic where it does everything for you. But I'm going to talk about program here first. It's a great mode. It's really auto mode on steroids. And I hope after this program that you'll migrate over to it, because This gives you a lot of power, and I'll explain that why here. I usually shoot in shutter aperture, but the benefit of program is it chooses both. Program and aperture, aperture and shutter are really kind of semi-automatic programs because you've got to go in there and choose shutter speed or aperture based on what you're doing. Program does it all for you. It controls and sets both shutter speed and aperture, program mode. One of the great benefits, it allows you to set the ISO and white balance, where in many cameras, it will not allow you to do that in full auto. Here's one of the biggies in program. Program mode also allows you to change shutter speed or aperture through a thing called program shift. And I'll go into that in a few minutes. But on many cameras, you've got the little dial, you've got the thing, program, aperture, shutter, manual, got the other ones, and then auto, or there's a green auto thing. It's a powerful mode, but I want to take control over this. But let me say one thing above all: get out there and shoot. Don't get so hung up on the technical components. That's one of the powers of program. Program can make your camera, especially when you get into program shift, it can make that Olympus of yours an extraordinarily sophisticated point and shoot camera. And again, just let the thing get the camera, then I'll show you some of the benefits of it. And then on your other cameras, you may not have that auto mode, but you've got your program. Here's the others. And then you look at your window and you've got the P down in the corner down there that tells us it's in program. There's that little P. But program mode, it gives you an aperture and a shutter speed, also based with the algorithms built in on the lens length you're shooting. So if you're shooting a longer lens, it's going to say, hey, this person, he or she is shooting a long lens. I better ramp the shutter speed up a little bit or the ISO, because you tend to get more movement. But what I love about program is that ability just to be pointing and shooting. In a lot of situations, a general exposure is going to be awfully nice. It's going to work very well. This in Myanmar, which is just heartbreakingly going through horrible times now, but they're going through a traditional celebration where they light fires into these balloons and float them into the air with good wishes. Or in Galapagos, have a Galapagos hawk preening. Now, when you get into wildlife, this is where you may want to start thinking about, I'll explain in a minute, the program shift ability. Because in this picture, it worked very well. It was about 2/50th of a second. Let me say something about shutter speeds. I shot NFL football for many years, and the old rule of thumb there was 1/500th of a second minimum to start stopping action, human running. So, and I'll talk about metadata in a minute, but what I love about program, it allows, it's a great street shooter thing. This is a street vendor in Marrakesh. It's like a silly little moment, but just a nice picture. And then a father-son in India. And just when you see these things, and when you photograph people, I photograph people all the time, and it's an intimidating process if it's the first time you've done it. Because like, holy cow, how can I go up to somebody and just step into their world and say, hey, can I take your picture? And you may get the nerve to do it. And the first time you go up to them and they say, yeah, and you freak out and you shoot a picture and they turn to you and they quit doing what was interesting. So you take a picture and you run. What I suggest is put the camera down and just eye to eye with them, and just pretty soon they'll get bored with you and they'll go back to doing what was interesting to you in the first place. Then that onus falls upon you to really make a nice picture and share it with them. I always get email addresses or addresses for people so I can send images to them. But the one thing you've got on that camera, which is huge, is the monitor on the back. You can share pictures real time with them. And the other suggestion where program is so wonderful is I've seen this where I'm working with people on workshops and trying to get them to do that, where, okay, we're going to go up to these people, and they get the nerve and they go up to somebody and they ask permission, and the person says yes. They've gone over that first big hurdle. Then the photographer looks down at their camera and starts fumbling with their camera for 5 minutes. You immediately lose confidence of your subject. This person, he or she, doesn't know what they're doing. Program mode, it's there. You don't have to worry about shutter. I do want high shutter speed, low aperture. What do I want? Program does it both for you. So you start shooting just to get the process done, just to get the process open, so that, you're thinking, okay, maybe this isn't the picture I want, but you start thinking, what can I do to create that image? And you work into it. And then sharing the pictures you actually enter a relationship with these people when you step into their world like this. And you sometimes want to elongate that relationship. I can't tell you the number of people I've made friends with worldwide through the cameras, but it's been my passport, it's been my visa, it's been my reason to approach people. You always get the question, how many pictures do you shoot on assignment or on a given subject? And my response to that always has been, it doesn't matter. You shoot till you have it, till you know you've got the moment, or till you know it's nothing's going to come to fruition. This was in Lhasa, Tibet. I saw this lady when I was running through the town trying to get somewhere real quickly. I've got a pretty strong personality. I went running up to her and said, can I take your picture? There were 2 frames. It was that and this one. So as soon as I shot it, it's like, I've got it. This is just one of those wonderful situations. Again, this is where program worked nicely. Now, there are those situations where you may want to take a little bit more control over things. So I was in the Badlands, and these grasses that are just absolutely gorgeous. And I wanted to photograph the grasses in the foreground with the incredible Badlands in the background. But the shutter speed aperture that straight program was giving me wasn't going to accomplish that, because I was getting the hills in the back were too soft. And the very, very front foreground was slightly out of focus. So what did I do? I shift to program shift. One of the greatest things since canned beer. What this allows you to do, if you look at the dial on the camera, right above where your thumb sits, right below behind the shutter, that's our shutter speed dial, or it's how I have mine set up. But if you turn that when you're in program shift, it increases or decreases the shutter speed. It increases or decreases the aperture in exposure value thing, meaning that it keeps the exposure correct, whichever way you go. So I was in Montana a couple of years ago, photographing this ranch, and these cameras. It's amazing that so often these cameras, the exposure systems on these Olympuses are so accurate, even shooting in snow, especially when you have a little bit of grayscale in there, it accomplishes the correct exposure. It just blows me away coming from a film background. But I'm shooting about a 1250th of a second to get this frozen the horses frolicking through the snow. Then turn around, there's this young lady riding by, this Wrangler running by, program shift. I'm just going to run the shutter speed down to 30th of a second. So I go from 1250 to a 30th, pan with her as she's going by, try to keep the camera kind of one of those focus points on the rider or on the subject as she goes by. I almost always use auto ISO. Again, the trinity of exposure is shutter, aperture, ISO. I'm trying to make it about the picture. I've seen people post things about, only real photographers use manual mode and all this. Or if you want to see the difference is when you go to manual mode. I don't care what you use. I want to see the image. I want to see a successful photograph, whatever it takes. If it's program shift, whatever it takes. But you have these incredible tools in the camera, and program shift it's kind of hard to argue with that. Like I said, auto ISO, you're in program shift, or in program, it's taking care of everything. And you can look down through the viewfinder, because even when you go to program shift, it's going to show you what you've changed that shutter speed to or change the aperture to. I know a lot of professional photographers as well as very advanced amateurs that use program because its advantages are so far ranging. This is in the Antarctic. It's a raft of penguins. They're porpoising. They come up, they blast through the water, and they do that porpoising. I think it's to either evade predators, or it's like us sticking our head underwater to take a look at underwater world. But that program shift on this particular picture, it worked really well. And the Taj Mahal, don't get intimidated by the controls in the camera. The more you shoot, the more, with both successes and failures, the greater the learning curve is going to be in your corner. The great thing about digital, every file has a metadata file that tells you shutter speed, aperture, everything. It's a great teaching tool. When you mess up, don't throw that file away. Take a look at the metadata file. Maybe because you were in a high enough shutter speed, or you didn't have enough zone of focus. All that becomes information for you as a photographer. So I'm shooting the Taj. I put the camera down at water level. I'm in program shift because I want to put it about 1/30th of a second. Well, let's see how it looks elsewise. Try high shutter speed. Go back at 500th of a second. It's a whole different look. Which is better? It depends. That's the mantra of this entire session. It depends. This is the beauty, the lovely thing about photography. Like I said, it's always, always, always that problem solving. Every photograph's a separate event in which you bring all those decisions to the point of pressing the shutter. What shutter speed do I want to use? Oh, what if I change this? This is just, and this is what I still love about it. I pick that thing up. I still pick that camera up, and it's electricity that goes through me. I absolutely love this. Or we did a workshop in India. I think probably Rick is out there. He and I have the same picture, a good friend of mine. So I'm shooting program. It's like, well, let's shoot a high enough shutter speed. Probably, I think it was about 2400 ISO. That thing handles shutter speed, ISO, noise incredibly well. Well, let's see what it looks like a little slower. Which is better? What are you trying to say? This is the wonderful thing. And I'm not saying overshoot, but stay with something till the thought process is kind of exhausted. What can I do to make this work? Or in Siena, Italy, this gray wall gave a perfect 18% reflectance for the meter. Meters work off 18%. If they try to find stuff and make it 18%, a main subject light color and make it 18%. But in this relatively low light, I wanted a bit more aperture, get a little more depth of field than the program suggested. So I used program shift to get a deeper depth of field. And then we have in Keensburg, Colorado, just short distance outside of Denver, thing called Wildlife Sanctuary. Absolutely wonderful place. Photographed these lines, late day, late afternoon light. And I wanted a little bit more because it was giving me about 125th, and I was shooting with the new 150 to 400 Olympus lens, which is, can't even start to tell you how great that lens is. But I wanted a little bit more shutter speed, pop it up through program shift. Powerful, powerful tool. I photographed this attendant at the baby Taj in Agra, India, a number of times, and I always bring him back pictures when I see him from the previous trip. And now he's a willing and enthusiastic subject. He's got a better mustache than I do. Like I said, this has been a passport. It's a reason I travel. It's that to meet people. And the more you meet them, I can't tell you how many friends I keep in touch with worldwide still. Well, let's move on to shutter. Shutter and aperture modes are really, like I said a little while ago, they're semi-auto modes. You still have to choose the respective shutter or aperture. So go back to our dial. Again, there's a shutter. We've got auto and also, and then we look at the other camera with shutter. So what does shutter do? It really is simple. It opens and closes to expose a sensor to light for a predetermined length of time. The number one thing it does is it controls motion. Each increment from 125th to 250 to 500 is one stop, and it's a direct relationship of time and light. So I've got this little panel. I won't stay on this very long, but it gives you an idea. So those are the things. So 1/8, the 1/15, the 1/30th, those are the shutter speeds going across. 1/8 of a second gives you more motion, more movement. 1/500th of a second and above gives you less movement. So 1/8 to 1/15 to 1/30, those are one stop apiece. 1/15 to 1 is half as fast as 1/30th. 1/30th, 1/250th is twice as fast as 125th. There will not be a test. So just to illustrate this, I'm shooting little waterfalls. Boring picture, but okay, I want to freeze the water. So go up to a 12/50th. You could go up higher and get that water where it was just razor sharp. So that conveys it nicely. But I want to go down to I want to give that ethereal look to this water. So what do? Drop it to 1/5 of a second. Which is better? It depends. What are you trying to say? These, again, are tools. And I promise you, the more you shoot, if you're a brand new person starting out, shoot an auto, move over to program, because, again, it does everything program does, but it gives you extra control of the image. And there's points, the more you shoot, the more this makes sense. I'm in the Antarctic. Okay, these little penguins, man, when they go flying off these cliffs, they're moving. I'm in a Zodiac raft. It's also moving. I have 2 points of motion. So I'm about 1,000th of a second or more to stop motion, because I've got those two things going on. But look at the eyes. And that's something I remember reading, and people who have attended my workshops have heard me say this ad nauseum, but one of the first things we look for in photographs are eyes. Then we look for sharpness. So if you have eyes and sharpness, and now that I've said that, you cannot not look at those penguins, those Adelie penguins' blue eyes. And this is what the porpoising looks like when the penguins are jumping out of the water. And talk about a fast event. So I'm over 12/50th of a second. And you've got to just kind of guess where it's going to be. But having good AF, autofocus on a camera is so critical. Now I'm using shutter, but I'm got to be a high enough shutter speed to stop. That's a Cara. This is in Isla Malvinas, the Falkland Islands. And it's on Steeple Jason Island, which is absolutely incredible. But it started out to be a sense of place photograph, a landscape. And then this Cara came in and was trying to frighten me away. So I was in shutter, but I force the ISO up higher, because in automatic ISO is going to try to accomplish the lowest ISO. So I want on this one to accomplish a higher ISO. So I set the ISO to 1600 so I can get a high shutter speed to start stopping the wings on that bird, because wings on birds, man, you've got to be at a high shutter speed. But it all kind of came together in this environmental portrait. And then up in high Arctic of northern Canada, this wave breaking in front of a iceberg. It's my homage to, I think he's Hasukai, the famous Japanese painter, with his wave breaking in front of Mount Fuji. But again, I saw these wave breaking, and I worked on this for about 20 minutes, just watching, waiting for the right one to come in. High shutter speed, took over the control of the aperture. I let the aperture be handled by the camera. I didn't have to worry about depth of field that much, because everything's kind of on one plane of focus there. I thought it worked nicely. And a friend of mine in the Galapagos, I had to have a high shutter speed again. That's a Galapagos, I think it was a flycatcher flying in front of John's lens there. And then back to our workshops in Wyoming. So photographing, we do this horse run, which is just brilliant. Oh my God, it's just so cool. I've got a shutter priority, and I'm turned this way, photograph these horses running by this way. Let's go slow to get that ethereal look about it. I've got a little bit of sharpness on that horse in the center, a little bit of sharpness on that horse on the mane on the left. I have sharpness on which your eye can fall, but then you can do those panning things. And it's great when you're doing panning photographs to have something in the background that breaks up, that gives you some definition in the background, that helps to accentuate that sense of motion. So how do I shoot this? Well, let's turn around and see what the other horses are doing. Well, let's go to a high shutter speed to freeze those horses. Which one's best? It depends. I may quit saying this because I think I've said it enough times. But those are powerful creative tools you have in the camera. And in many ways, that for some reason, that program shift and program could be your default go-to. And then in Sri Lanka, a bunch of the stilt fishermen shot this at a full second exposure. I used my Stingray neutral density grad filter. Not a grad, sorry, it was a neutral density filter, because I wanted to take light away, which is counterintuitive to many photographers. Why are we trying to give light away? We want light. No, sometimes you want to get rid of light so you can do a slow exposure, so you can get that sense of motion going on. Shutter priority here too. I'm using an underwater housing with my Olympus, and with a 7:14 set at 7 millimeters, so it's effectively 14 millimeters. I've got the camera set at 500th of a second because we were swimming with these banded sea crates. They're very toxic. Snakes are supposed to be pretty reticent. But I had my ISO set at 1600 because I wanted a lot of depth of field. So the water line almost at the foreground to the background is in focus. And you got that nice moment of that water splashing from the banded sea crate's tail. Same thing, I'm back in the Antarctic and I'm shooting a shutter priority. This leopard seal is disengaging a penguin chick from its head. And this thing sounds terrible. It kind of went through a number of these like popcorn, and enough that it was like, okay, this has got to be a high shutter speed. Again, I'm in a Zodiac raft, we're flopping around. I had to have, it was 1600th of a second or higher to get that. And I've used this joke before, but I love it. People ask why I don't ride rodeo. Besides the fact that I'm a lousy horse person, this is the other reason. But again, these are the kind of events. We do this as one of the final night events in both our Wyoming workshops, this rodeo, and it's just amazing. But I love this thing with the horse's hoof, just a little bit of distance in between. And again, when you see a photograph that works, start breaking it down. Why is that working to me? I love that separation between the hoof and the rider's head. I also love his hand up there, spread wide open and his body off the ground, the horse off the ground. There's a lot of cool things working. This is in Mongolia. It's an okay picture, but it's shutter priority. It's 2500th of a second or higher. It's this young archer in a famous festival they do there. But I love the arrow just coming off there. And man, you've got to have one high shutter speed to get that, to be able to get it. And this is one of those events we didn't have particularly the best time of day to shoot it in. Sometimes you have to go with what you have and you work with the light you have given to you. Let's go to the other extreme. It's in South Pacific, looking down off the bow of the ship I was riding. And all these dolphins come up to bow ride the pressure ridge off the bow of the ship. It's like, God, that looks so cool. Again, I want to shoot a slow shutter speed, 15th of a second. Just keep it there. And it doesn't, you're not cheating if you put it in burst mode. Give yourself a better chance to get it. But again, I've got sharpness in the water spraying and the dorsal, behind the dorsal fin on the porpoise. And then in South Georgia, one of the most phenomenal places on earth, shooting a slow shutter speed of these king penguins as they're coming out of the surf. I've got sharpness in one or two of them. That's all I need. I'll accept the softness in the others because I want that fluidity of that water flowing in and out. I think it's just it really gives a nice feel to the picture. And shutter priority in Serengeti on the Grumeti River. This croc had parked itself below this small waterfall, waiting for something to be swept over into its mouth. I thought, oh, that's going to look so cool. So I think I used the ND, built-in ND on the EM1X, and I also use a ND Stingray filter on it because I wanted to get rid of light. It was so intensely bright then. But I shot that like at a 15th or an 8th of a second, and the croc was really still, so I was able to get the sharpness on the croc's eye, which is so imperative. Remember what I said, what we look for. Old picture of mine, but from Namibia. Oh, I love that country. It's so amazing. It's a cheetah, and it's running by. And it's like, this is shot with the Olympus 300-8, which is effectively a 600-8. And I thought, well, I'm going to give it a chance and shoot it a 30th of a second. Focus on the hips of the cheetah as it runs by, because that's where the power in the cheetah comes from. So it's one of those. So these are some examples of where shutter. I felt shutter was the appropriate one for me. Aperture. Let's move on to aperture. Another powerful mode. Which is best mode? Depends. Aperture simply controls the amount of light that is allowed through the lens, and it determines the depth of field, DOF. You've seen that sometimes in magazines or stuff, or the zone that is in focus in the picture from foreground to background. It's no more elaborate than that. Don't let these terms obfuscate the reason you're doing this. So again, the same thing, F2 to F2.8 to 4 to 5.6. Each of those increments is one stop. And it's a direct relationship of time and light. So if you look at the front of your Olympus camera, and if you look down at the tube, Those are the diaphragm blades are way closed down, and that little black circle in the middle, that is the aperture. That's the area of the lens that lets the light in. That was closed way down. This is wide open. But I'll show you in this next one. So that's an f2 lens. The dark gray area on the top left, if that's an f2 lens, it has to be all the way open, those blades on the aperture, to get f2. f2.8 is 50% less than that. f4 is 50% less than that. 5.6, and look at that. It's really simple. But let's make it a little bit more cohesive, I think, here. f2 gives in more light and less depth of field. Now look at the aperture and look over to the right at f16. It's a greater depth of field and you have less light. So you mix those two with that. And the camera, the beautiful thing about that program mode is it takes care of both those things for you. In aperture or shutter, you have to choose which one you want to take control of. So once again, back to that dial. There's the aperture, there's the auto, there it is on the other camera. And I finally found something to do with all those rolls of film that have been in my freezer for years. Here is a picture shot at f2 with about 135 millimeter lens. Now I'll show it a before and after, so you don't have to try to strain your eyes watching this. Excuse me. But look at the foreground. You see those rolls of film that are out of focus? And look at the background. See those rolls of film that are out of focus? That's f2. Let's go to f4. I can't see that much difference. Let's go to f8. Oh, wow, look at that. Now we're starting to see difference. Go to f16. Holy schmoly, there is no question. You combine the f2 to the f16, that's what you have the ability to control with aperture. This is a powerful tool for you. And again, do you see what I'm now? I hope this is making sense. When you're out photographing a flower bed, oh, look at this. That's so beautiful. Well, maybe I want a little bit more depth of field to get those background flowers in focus. Or maybe I want a wide open to start dropping the background out of focus. This is okay picture. It's kind of boring, but I shot it to illustrate this. But it was shot with that new Olympus 8-25, which is incredible. But it has this beautiful, because what they've done, they've built these lenses with speed in mind, and especially the 1.2 lenses and the bokeh, the out of focus nature on these lenses is just wonderful. Or you get in closer with a macro lens and you let that background just melt out so your eye goes immediately to it. But these where you're taking control of your photograph through these controls. Well, I'm going to shoot a huge zone of focus. I'm photographing this stilt fisherman not silt, but a traditional net fisherman in Myanmar. And I want a lot of zone of depth of field because I want those nets that they use and him in focus. Well, I mentioned the f1.2 lens and eyes. Remember that? So I've told Olympus they could have welded those f1.2 lenses wide open as far as I was concerned. That's what I shoot them for. They are, because they're bokeh, the out of focus nature, they are so sharp. So your zone of focus on the Sadhu in Pashupatanath is on his eyes. And I love how everything just beyond it falls out. So it really accentuates that. But in Bhaktapur, outside of Kathmandu, I saw this lady and I talked to her for a while and said, "Can I just kind of hang out with you for a while?" She said, "Yeah." So she was a street person, but she finally stopped just to have a cigarette. And I thought, oh, makes a nice picture. I don't want a lot of depth of field. I don't want a lot of background information because it would compete for her. Is this making sense about this problem solving constantly we get to do? And here in the southern part of Papua New Guinea, this young girl shot with that fast lens again. Wide open. It's that bokeh, that bokeh is so beautiful in that lens. Same thing with this young Hadza warrior and hunter-gatherer. Sorry, they're not warriors, hunter-gatherer in Serengeti, smoking a cigarette before a hunt. And then shot in an f11 with a 24 millimeter lens, equivalent, 12 millimeter lens, 24 full frame equivalent at f11 because I wanted foreground, background to be in focus. If the llama's in focus, the background's out of focus, it's about the llama. So now it's an environmental portrait. And man, you've got to be careful when those, some of those animals, when you're photographing in Africa, they are in the bush and they don't follow instructions very well. So you work with what you've got. So you work for moment. Something else here, we always like things in asymmetrical proportions. We like 3s and 1s and things like that. So we have 3 lions and the nice mom with the nice moment. But that long lens just starts to drop that background out of focus. Thank heavens, because that would have competed way too much and drawn your eye away from the action of the moment and the action of the eyes of the cubs. And in Iceland, using that 300 f4 with a 1.4 converter, so I'm effectively shooting 840 millimeters, handheld, holding the camera. I didn't have a tripod with me. Tripods are great, but I hate them until you need them, and I love them. But shooting with that lens, it took about an hour and a half to accomplish this one frame because I kept flying off, coming back, flying off. I kept scooting closer, 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 kept the camera up the whole time, waiting for the moment. Remember what I said about how we like eyes in photograph? You have a lot of eyes here to choose from. And a Where's Waldo picture, bringing an element into the photograph that creates one more engagement to your audience. I love the fly on this horse's nose. Just that beautiful light, that bokeh, that saw out of focus nature, that long lens shot wide open so the background drops out of focus, but you have a sharpness on the fly. And revisiting Taj Mahal another day, shot at a pretty much, I think it was about an f8 because you see that little post on the left is just starting to go out of focus, which I think kind of helps bring the attention back to the Taj and the reflection. Then shooting really wide on Steeplechase Island in Isla Malvinas, the Falkland Islands. This albatross colony, it's incredible. But bringing that information in, I shot pictures of the albatross chick very close and tight. Was it in a zoo? Was it in a cage? But here, by bringing this information in, you tell your audience something about the place. Then photographing a Las Vegas performer, fast lens. I think, could have been a 45-1.2, but just bringing that image where that background just goes away. And you have all these controls in those lenses. And like I said, the more you shoot, the more this makes sense to you. The more you know the technical stuff about the camera, the more the technical stuff gets out of the way. And Western Africa, I forgot which country, it was not camera. Anyway, these ladies were members of a voodoo tribe, and I wanted to shoot them so that the lady on the left, who had just amazing eyes, was kind of the main component, and the others were kind of the supporting cast. Again, it's 3 elements to this, but they became less impactful by being more out of focus, but as powerful in the whole ending picture. Manual. I've got finally just put the manual mode right there all together. So I used to use manual almost exclusively back in film days, especially. And it was a great learning tool because shooting for National Geographic on film, there was no room on slide film. There was no room for error. You had to have your exposure correct. So I learned to expose correctly with a hand meter. And not that every picture on that 36 exposure roll was the moment, but at least they were exposed correctly. So when that moment did surface, I had a good shot at it instead of it being over or underexposed. This is a story on the Yukon. It's a Yupik. He's getting ready to harpoon a seal. We had this ethereal morning. This is not Photoshop. We don't manipulate pictures like that. This is what the scene looked like. And then from one of our workshops in Wyoming, a friend of mine sitting around a campfire, shot in manual mode because I took a light meter reading on his face. That's the exposure I wanted correct. If I'd gone a general reading, this could have been a tough one for a camera meter to have handled. So took the reading, and this is kind of mixing color sources too, where you have that late day deep blue light on the top of his hat. That's not snow. That's just, I think, a little bit of mist. And then the warmth of the campfire in his face. and we're mixing warm and cold colors, which if any of you took Art 101, you had a color wheel, and those colors across from each other, complementary colors. When you bring them into a photograph or into a painting, you create an image that resonates with us. Manual mode again. I saw this young Maasai. It's a little bit bright here, sorry. Looking over his cattle herd in Ngorongoro, closer to Ngorongoro Crater in Serengeti. And I saw him running up, and I said, don't move, don't move. And he kind of looked at me. He was trying to figure out what I'm doing. But this is a 20-second exposure, and I'm painting his face slightly during the exposure with a little bitty cheap flashlight I carry. But I love the star field because it gives you a sense of the sky's world. Manual again here because this guy's feeding fuel to a stove underneath the city spa in Marrakesh, Morocco. This heats up the thing, and it was light to dark, light to dark, light to dark, back and forth. So I took a reading once when his light had kind of went on his face, and I established it for that. In this picture, next one's not much, but it was shot out of the plane window heading up to Cusco, Peru. But I kind of like this thing. But this was, believe it or not, 8 seconds handheld against a camera, against an airplane window. I had a black cloth, and there's devices made now that are big suction cups that are great. Airplanes can give great points of view to photograph, from which to photograph. But I love that lightning storm going on back in the background. You got a little star action going on in the sky. It's an okay picture, but to me, it's like 6 seconds handheld. That's ridiculous. And then that was 2017, I think, the eclipse we had that went over a lot of Western states in the United States. But shot on manual because I wanted to take control of everything on that. Because if I'd shot it on an aperture or shutter priority, it very well may try to brighten it up too much. So there are those times where I want to take control. And this is a 45-second photograph from a story in Papua New Guinea, way back, that old story for Geographic. Guy walking through the middle of town, or the little village town, this little village with a lantern. And it's one of those things where I kind of waited. I kind of talked to him while he was walking through. So I wanted him to go slow. So when the light got perfect, he'd walk through. So the light balance between the sky, and this standing there looking at it, the sky was almost gone. But exposure is cumulative. So it kept building up on him, and I love how the lantern kind of painted the front of each hut as he was walking through it. Same story, manual exposure, because this is strongly side lit. I took a reading on the faces. That was my exposure for the picture of these guys, these Bahinamo village members, spearfishing for catfish in this river. And I love this stacked aspect of this photograph, leading your eye from foreground to background with the sun ray coming in and all this. Manual exposure in Iceland of this guy. We were camped out on this glacier that has since then gone up in melt because of the volcanic activity there. But this guy was coming back with supplies for us. It's like, oh, that's just gorgeous. And I, again, took over the exposure because I wanted precisely to be the exposure I wanted on this thing. The moon is not photoshopped in or anything else. That's how the scene looked. 220-second exposure on Torres del Paine National Park, the Valle de France. You get that super melty water with those long exposures, obviously on a tripod. This is when the tripod's your friend. Stromboli in Aeolian Islands of Italy. You can actually walk to the side of this active volcano. Again, when you have light that changes this drastically and so quickly, I wanted to take it over. So my exposure, the background was kind of the constant. And the volcano, I knew it would be within range of the sensor. This is a story. This is back in film days. This is in story on Surfing Baja down in Mexico. And I'm out with an underwater housing in the waves with a flash. I wanted, again, my constant to be the sunset behind him. I didn't want it to blow out. So I set my exposure to that. And then I set my strobe to automatic so that it was filling them with the amount of light I needed. Just could look kind of cool that he's got those devil-looking eyes too. Manual exposure here too. Samoa, one of the fire dancers, shoot a slow exposure to get some of that motion going on in that. But again, you had to be careful on this, because if I shot an automatic exposure, it probably would have tried to have exposed for the flames, which would have made him too dark. And back to our workshop in Wyoming, but teepee, we did this on purpose. We've got it lit inside, long exposure, about a 30-second exposure. There's that old 500 rule, which is good or not good, that, you can do astrophotography if you take your lens length, divide it into number 500. I've heard with micro four thirds, it's better to do 600. And the answer to that, dividing that lens length into 500 or 600, gives you the maximum length of time you can expose something with that, expose the sky with stars without getting the start of streaks. And then just shot a few weeks ago in Big Bend National Park, one of those international dark sky places. That was about 4 minutes later. That's the place we stayed, where you get these amazing skies there. Boy, astrophotography has taken off, hasn't it? Oh my gosh. And back in the Badlands, manual exposure. Those are all manual exposures where I'm taking it over. This is about a 10-second exposure. Got a couple of stars in the sky. It's in, like I said, Badlands, with this car rounded the curve there. It just kind of gave a nice sense of place. Again, you have this wonderful time of day to photograph after sunset, before total darkness, where you have enough ambient light where you can mix it with introduced light to get that really nice palette. This is 8mm, the 8mm lens. This is in Makatea in the South Pacific. That's a pitch black underwater cave grotto. You have to hike in. I went in there about an hour ahead and lit the cave. That's my lighting all the way through it. And this is about a 3-second exposure, and any longer would have blurred those swimmers pushing off too much. But like I said, exposure is cumulative. And when you saw this scene, it was almost too dark looking at, even with the lighting I had, but I knew that the exposure would open it up. And then back to Namibia. This is Deadvalley, one of my favorite places on earth. I know one guy out there listening hopefully has this exact same picture. It's this desiccated tree forest. These things are like 600 years old. It's about a 40 to 50-second exposure. I may be too long on that, but if I'd gone any longer, I would have started getting star streaks, which I didn't want on that. Bulb, I'll just do one quick one on bulb since we didn't mention that. Some cameras don't have that anymore, some do. Bulb is when the shutter stays open as long as you hold it down. As long as you hold the shutter or use a shutter release and hold it down. So here's an example of this. This is I think a 35-minute exposure. Teeny little fire in Nicaragua in a Mosquito Indian village. And the sky going overhead, and I'm actually using a neutral density grad filter, one of the Stingray ND grad filters, to darken the sky because it would have been too great a difference. I only carry a couple of filters with me. I carry a Stingray neutral density grad. I carry a polarizer, a Stingray polarizing filter. And no one asked for it, but I'm going to talk about the travel gear I carry. This is one of the reasons I'm a believer in what Olympus is doing here. My work runs in magazines like Geographic. It has been carried by Geographic Image Collection. Their criteria is extremely high, I can assure you, and this equipment easily meets that. I print up to 3 to 4 to 5 feet wide, and I really defy anyone to look at those and say, show me the difference. But I'll show you what I love about it. This is kind of what I travel with now. I've got the 150 to 400 top right stellar lens, 40 to 150 stellar lens, a 12 to 100, which talk about a go-to. If you're going to carry one lens that can really cover so many bases, that lens will do it. I've got the 7 to 14. I've got 2 of the f1.2 lenses down there. I've got my 8mm f1.8. Got my flash. I don't include in this picture the little curly cord I've got with it, but I've got my 2 filters there too. You can see them. And what I love about this stuff, is it all fits in my carry-on bag. This is the Think Tank Airport Advantage, I think it is. If you think I don't want to ship equipment under a plane, you're correct. I've lost stuff. I've known friends who've had equipment stolen. That equipment's going to go on with me. So I can get my work done with this equipment. So it all fits in with that bag. That orange thing up there carries my batteries. And I can actually stick a battery charger in there. I've got my 40 to 150 there on the left. It's astounding. And I actually can lift that up into the overhead. If you want to start traveling really light, this is a way to go. I've done this before on some of these trips. I take the EM5 Mark III, and I like that 12 to 45. That lens is astounding. If you think about a lot of the great photojournalists that shot everything with a 35, 50, or 90, you've got all those in one lens. And talk about unobtrusive, talk about easy to carry. You can have it out all day, sharp as can be. But also in this little selection of the f1.8 lenses, 1.8s, and there's the 12 f2 on the lower right. There's a 17, 25, and 45 1.8s. And I also, in that small bag, because this would go in a small Think Tank bag, a shoulder bag, and the 12 to 200, which is effectively a 24 to 200, which gets you into 400, gets you into a realistic wildlife Africa lens. So this is a nice one to think about if you want to really make life simple or force yourself to make it about photography. So I want to thank you all for your time. I want to say happy trails to you. I hope our paths cross. I hope I see you at a First Light workshop. I hope I see you wherever. Get out and shoot. This is an amazing craft. This is exciting. It's always different. And I put up, let me get back to there. Hold on. And I put up, not supposed to go away. Tell you what, if you're interested, send me an email. I'll give you my links. Instagram is at Jay Dickman Photo. Look at Get Olympus site because they've got a nice spread of work on that. If you go to the Get Olympus, under support, under pros, you'll find my work on that. You can find us on firstlightworkshop.com. First Light Workshop, like singular. And on Instagram, like I said, it's Jay Dickman Photo. Oh, there we go. But do check out.
Sorry, I popped back on. It worked.
That's okay. I'm ready.
It's up.
So is there anybody left?
There is. There's a lot of people left, and we definitely have some comments. If you want to drop your slideshow down and join me, we can go through some of the questions we got.
There we go.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for hanging out tonight. We've seen a lot of good activity in the comments. I've been trying to answer some of your guys' questions as they come through when I can. One that came up that I'll just ask really quick up front. A lot of people were asking which of the 1.2 lenses you like to use for your portraits the most. That came up several times.
Okay, that is a multi-layered answer. I'll make it quick. If I'm traveling light, if I want to travel minimally, that 25-1.2 always goes with me. I'll make it work. If I'm going on a long one, like I do a lot of those around the world by private jet trips for Geographic. I know it's tough. Someone's got to do it, but I'll take 2 or 3 of them with me then. And if I'm taking 2, I'll take the 45-1.2 and the 17-1.2. Because then I've got my 17 for that 35-1.2 look, and I've got the 45-1.2 for the portraits. So if I'm traveling really minimally, the 1.2, the 25, a little bit fatter traveling, I've got a little bit bigger bag, 17-45. If I'm going on one of the around the world, I'll carry all 3 with me. But the 25, it's user's choice. The benefit, obviously, user get less depth of field with the 45. You get greater depth of field with the 17, but you get a really cool look, especially if you're photographing night scenes or low light situations of people and doing things. That can be just a spectacular lens for that. So I can spend everyone's money for them very easily here.
I was going to
Buy all
say
three.
it's a closeout sale.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah. Somebody just asked a question. Jay, what is your most comfortable ISO? Where's your stopping point?
Well, that's a good one. Stopping point. I mean, I don't hesitate to shoot 6400. And it's interesting. I don't know if anybody has seen it. I'm sure a lot of people out there have, because this is a good group. But in Photoshop and I'm not plugging them, but in Lightroom, you have the enhanced tool now, which is unbelievable. That you should go and try it, because you can do either enhanced. There's a couple of variations on it, but I shoot regularly at 1600. I have no hesitation shooting 1600. Where people make a mistake, I think where people get into trouble is they tend to underexpose darker situations. Oh, I need to accentuate the dark. You're exacerbating the problem. Noise comes from the blue channel. Shadows come from the blue channel. If you underexpose, guess which channel you're underexposing to a clipping extent? It's the blue channel. It's the shadow. So you start trying to open that up in any camera, you're going to exacerbate the noise. The ideal digital exposure is slightly overexposed from perfect exposure, slightly. I'm real careful with people, because then somebody goes out and blows it out and it's clipped all the way to the wall. And it's like, no, it's barely over, because you actually have more information from that midpoint to complete white than you do from the midpoint to complete black. So 1600, I love 1600. It's wonderful, which is astounding to me as a film guy from many years ago.
Mm-hmm.
You shot 1600 on Tri-X, or, high speed DUS on color film was 400. Wow. I can shoot 1600 and it looks clean completely. Something interesting too is I don't sharpen many of my pictures. And it's just how I do things. But I'm astounded by, and I sound like I'm on a soapbox or Olympus, but I'm not. I really believe what they're doing is great. But I'm astounded by the lack of chromatic aberration on their lenses and the quality of their files. So I'm off my soapbox. So did that answer that question? Somewhere in there was an answer, right?
I think you got to it. It was just, we took a walk around the park to get there, but we made it. As a follow-up question to that really quickly, and we actually do have several questions tonight, so hopefully you can hang tight with me. Do you use auto ISO when you're shooting in manual ever? Or do you rely on the auto ISO, or only when you're in the program modes?
It depends. I said that a few times. It really does depend. Because sometimes, again, auto ISO is I love auto ISO. Be aware that it always tries to default to the lowest ISO. Sometimes I want more depth of field. If I'm going to be in manual, I want 1,000th of a second. Auto ISO is going to try to take it down low. That's its nature. I can go in and limit that to minimum and maximum, or I can set my ISO manually. So that's where I'm saying it depends. I'm not trying to escape the question, but it really does depend on the situation. So yes, I will use auto ISO on manual, but if I want more control of it, if I start being really concerned about my depth of field, my zone of focus, I'll take over the ISO myself. Does that answer that fairly, you think?
I think so.
Good.
I think so. I'm going to answer a question really quick, because I've seen twice somebody asked when we are doing another one of these. And just as a reminder, we do these every other Thursday night, usually about the same bat time, same bat channel, but sometimes we go a little earlier. But yeah, so in 2 weeks, we will be back with another travel themed adventure photography session. going in a different direction. So we hope that you will definitely join us for that. There was also questions. Do you recall your horse photo, the panning photo where it was in motion? Do you have an estimate of what shutter speed you might be using? I did see that one come up a couple of
30th
times.
of a second.
30th of a second. That wasn't even an
before.
estimate.
And it's 30th, and we actually, in our workshops, we do that. We do a evening of panning photographs where we have horses and riders that go back a number of times. And I found that 30th is kind of a good compromise. Shooting burst mode is a real good tool on that. Give yourself more options for it.
Oh,
Make it successful, because again, once you have that successful image, you're going to be like, oh, I'm the best thing since canned beer. So let's move on. But you have that information. Then you know how to do it. Well, next time I'm going to drop it, because sometimes I shoot the horse. Sometimes I'll shoot him down at 1/8 of a second. You get a lot more motion where it's much more poetic looking. But as long as, and sometimes I won't even have any sense of sharpness anywhere. But I want to tell you one thing real importantly. Everything I've talked about, when I talk about technical things, technical tools, tips, etc., all those go out the window when it comes down to looking at the image and determining, does it work or does it not? It really, that's what it all comes down to. And again, that's what I love about this. So try a 30th when you do a horse panning. If it's a person running by, you could go down slower than that. If it's a bird going by and you want to stop the wings, or, I mean, that goes to the other extreme, but you may try a 60th. If you're photographing an F1 race car, you go to 125th if it's going by you 200 miles an hour. So it depends. I mean, that's been, like I said, I told you it was going to be the mantra of this seminar, but it really does depend. But that's a good one. If specifically for the horses, that 30th of a second is a good one to begin with. Shoot a few and then cheat. If you have the opportunity to tell somebody like, wait a second, don't do it again yet, cheat, look at your pictures, chimp, and see like, oh, that didn't quite work. I'm cutting things off. Because again, these are great. And that's why I suggest that people go to the zoo before you go to that, make that trip to Africa or to the Grand Canyon or Yellowstone. Go to the zoo and photograph there. Get used to like, it goes back to that same thing about doing an assignment for Geographic. So much of my time is research, because research, knowledge is power. And the more knowledge you bring to the table, the more you know what you're doing. My answers are never short, you notice.
I agree. That's okay. I agree. We should all be going out and experimenting and trying. You never know until you try and fail and go, oh, no, I didn't like that.
Yep.
So Dixie wants to know, sorry, my computer is upset with me.
I see. What body do I use?
What is the body that you use the most?
Well, I use my body a lot. I walk around. Try not to go to others. It's kind of metaphysical. Usually I use, actually the one I find myself constantly using is the EM1 Mark III. I'm really comfortable with that camera. It doesn't have the bird tracking that the EM1X does, which is huge. If I'm in Africa, I've got the EM1X. If I'm always on that. But for an all-around camera, the EM1 Mark III is my go-to camera. And like I said, if I go, and we're back to it, it depends. If I'm wandering around, I'll do some of these geographic trips where I'll go into one country and I've taken the 12-100 as the only lens I've taken. And then a couple of times, like I said, I've taken the 12-45 because it's like, God, this is just such a spectacular little, and it goes back to what photography was created about, which is don't let the equipment get in the way. The original cameras are small. You look at some of these big DSLRs and everything now. Oh my God, I can't imagine having to lift that.
Right.
So that's what I like about these things. It's this can be on my shoulder all day long, it can be around my neck all day long. It's like, oh, I forgot the camera's there, and it's there when you need it. So that's the camera I use the most.
Next up, do you do your own post editing? And then follow up to that, do you do a lot of post editing? Because we did have a couple of questions about that too.
Sure. I do my own post editing. I shoot everything in RAW. I want the full control. I want the most amount of data. I see the argument, well, I want to shoot SOOC straight out of camera because that's pure photography. Well, those algorithms were written by engineers that are impacting saturation, color, sharpness, everything. So it's not pure photography. It's being impacted anyway. I do post-process. I try to keep it to realistic strengths. I don't remove things. I don't add things. I dodge and burn. I have my own tools in Photoshop in which I do that. To me, I look at it that I will do the same things to that I'll do that I used to do to a black and white print in a darkroom. So I have this digital darkroom in which I can work on my images and make them look like I saw it in my mind's eye when I press a shutter. And I think that's one of the greatest powers of digital photography is that you have the ability to do that. I try not to overprocess, but I try to make it look like I saw it when I press a shutter, because the more you shoot, like I said, the more you know this stuff. When you look at a scene, you immediately interpret how it's going to look. I try, to me, the final fruition of this process is a print. I'm a geek. I love looking at my stuff on my computers. I've got so many monitors and everything. Yes. But to me, picking up that print, there is nothing as personal and as intimate as that, because you pick it up, you feel it, you can smell the paper, you see the ripples on it, and it's a reflective light source versus a backlit light source, because nothing ever is going to replicate what that monitor looks like. You've got thousands of little LEDs pointing out, blasting you with radiation versus that reflected light print that it's kind of got to be there. So I hope that answered that. So what's a follow-up?
Actually, we're going in a different direction now.
Okay.
I'm going on. The comments come in really fast, guys. So if I don't get to your comment, it's not because I didn't like your comment. My screen is constantly scrolling here, and I'm trying to catch as many of them as I can. So bear with me. Several questions about when you're using aperture priority or, program mode, do you have a specific metering mode you stick with all the time, or does it depend?
It kind of depends. There were a couple of pictures in there that were spot metered. But what I found is that metering system that Olympus has is so ridiculously accurate. And I'm not shilling this, I promise you. I've just been so impressed with that thing. And coming from a background of film and slide film like myself, where you did have to be dead on your exposure, coming over to the digital world was very easy because there's more latitude for error. But repeat that question again. I'm off on my...
Kind of just if there's a metering mode that you go,
I usually
what's your go-to?
The usual full bore metering mode.
Same.
At times I'll go to spot meter if it's a really unique situation. If you've got photographing somebody on stage, if you're photographing the fishermen in the river in Papua New Guinea with that strong side lighting, and if I do and the background is so black that the camera's meter would be doing the correct function and trying to brighten that up to 18% gray. But I don't want it that because it would have blown out the faces on the guy. So I want to take control of the light. There are times where I want to take complete control of everything. There are other times, and again, that program and program shift are such powerful tools that you can react immediately to what you see. There's nothing worse than seeing a great situation and your camera's not ready, and you pick it up and fumble it, and the moment's in Detroit by then, and I'm still in Denver. So it's just, and that's one thing we hammer on our students in the workshop is when that camera goes on around your neck, you're thinking and seeing photographically. You are responsible for, and so I try to get everything set for what I think is going to be a potential situation, but things come out and you've got to be ready for left field. And that's what I was saying earlier, that you can't go into assignments like that with something so strongly written in your mind's eye that you don't see something come out of left field. And again, that's where I think in photography, you've got to be, when that camera goes on around your neck, you've got to be so on, you've got to be so tuned. And that's what I was saying about if you've got a trip planned somewhere, get out and practice. I can't tell you how many people I see on these geographic trips They've got their new camera with them. They bought it a year ago and they intended to read the manual. Well, that year got by, then all of a sudden they're in the plane, trying to figure this thing out. And the camera then becomes a obstacle between them and experiencing the event. Where that person, that photographer that knows photography, that loves photography, that knows their equipment. So, you always hear that statement, don't you put your camera down and enjoy the scene. Trust me, I see the beauty in the scene. But what I find the camera does for me, it takes me that much more deeply into it, because then you're not only you're reacting on several levels. You're reacting emotionally, which is the first one, but then you're reacting intellectually, like, what's drawing me into this? Oh my God, look how the light's playing on that over there. So I find the camera takes me that much more deeply into it. But again, if you aren't that comfortable, shoot the beautiful sunset. And then I always tell people too, I saw that in Badlands. I put up a picture of I don't know if I showed it or this thing or not, a little kid taking a picture of the sunset. And I see this all the time. Great sunset. People are, take a picture of the sunset. Is that sunset in Kansas? Is it in Melbourne? Is it in Canberra? Is it in Detroit? Where is it? But turn around and look what that light is doing to the background. Because often that's that light photographers wait for hours, is that golden hour light. So I tell people, get that out of your system, get the sunset, but turn around and look what the light's doing back here. So hope that gave some form of answer to that.
I've got another it depends question. Are you ready?
Okay. Can I just answer it depends first?
Yeah, we'll start out there. So what shooting mode would you choose when shooting on safari in Kenya?
I would probably default to shutter, because animals tend to move, and some animals move real fast, some don't. And this is where those darned animals just won't listen to us. And I've tried so many times in Serengeti and all, and they just won't communicate with us. So by default, I kind of go to shutter. Now I have photographer friends, pros that argue with that with me up and down. I want aperture mode because my world is about motion and moment and controlling that motion. And you can absolutely do an aperture, but you don't have as fine tuning to do that as you do in shutter. So that's my default in those situations. Because, oh my God, there goes a secretary bird flying through the air. I want 25/100th of a second. I'm an aperture. Well, the aperture is going to give me f8 at 250th of a second. Well, there went that picture. Yep. But it depends. And I think that's one reason those manufacturers put those two modes right by each other too. And don't forget, you have those custom modes on the Olympus too, which are really powerful, because you can set up your bird shooting one thing in one custom mode. You can photograph your big animals in the other one. Then you go back and forth from one to the other without having to rethink the code. So powerful, powerful tools. And what I love about all these things is it makes the photographic process that much more powerful.
Follow-up question to that, actually, that I did see fly by. I'm telling you, the comments move so fast, guys. What would be a lens choice for African safari? I know what I would pick, but I'm curious. I think I know what you're going to pick.
You know what I'm going to pick. It's a spectacular lens. It's the 150 to 400, because it gives you that 300 to 800 range with a 1.4 built-in, 1.25 built into it, that you can also use your 1.4 or your 2x teleextender on. So it gives you a range of 300 to 2,000 millimeters. And 4.5 at 800 is realistic. Now, having said that, I love the 100-400 as well. I think it's a really, really good lens. The benefit of that lens is you don't have to break the bank for it.
Yep.
Even though this 150 to 400 compared to full frame lenses of that. But the 100 to 400 gives you that 200 to 800 range again. The only thing I have with it issue is, so especially when you get late day backlit, that's where you start giving up f-stops out the kazoo, and that's frustrating. But if I only could have the 100-400, I'd take that in a heartbeat. It's a great lens, and it's manageable. Some of those places, if you're going to Kenya, you may have to fly on a small plane out to your safari camp. And I want that camera, and all your stuff's going to be on that small plane with you anyway, but flying over, you want that lens with you on board. Yeah. But that 100-400 is a great lens, and I think it's weather sealed too, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it does take the teleconverters as well. I mean, if you have the daylight, if you got the daylight, I mean, I've shot photographed several birds throughout my yard. I've got my wildlife sanctuary set up, and it's great in the daytime, especially, when I can get my 2X teleconverter on there and really get in nice and tight with it. And you do need that length. And it's funny because we see people on the Geographic trips all the time that they come up to me at the start of it and like, I've got my iPhone, this will handle everything. It's like, I love my iPhone. I shoot with it too. It's wonderful. But where they hit the wall is in Africa. And everybody comes up to you like, oh, I wish I had a real camera. They're great for their limited amount of use. But if you're going to Africa, one of those places, oh my gosh. And something else to think about. Well, I won't even go there. I was going to say suggest renting equipment, but that's a whole different discussion. So we've gone super over time, and I appreciate everyone and the nonstop comments that are coming in. I'm going to ask one more quick question so that we can let Jay eat some dinner. Jay, do you have any books published? I really enjoyed this.
I did Perfect Digital Photography that McGraw-Hill published. We did 2 editions of that. And then my co-author was Jay Kinghorn. He got out of the business completely, but I'm talking to a couple of other publishers right now about other books. And if you sign on to go to firstlightworkshop.com, my shameless self-promotion, and you can sign up, and we don't bug people. We send out notices when we've got events coming up, and we may go a couple of months. But if you just sign up, register on that, and just say, hey, I'd love to know when your book comes out, I'll be glad to do that.
Awesome. There's so many very lovely comments, and I've been reading them through the whole thing, saying your photos are amazing and people are just impressed with your presentation. Lots of thank you, great presentations. And really, thank you guys all for coming and joining us. I know that we take an hour out of your evening, and we just appreciate that you guys stay and join us every other Thursday and take part in these presentations. It really makes it all worth it. So thank you. And I just love the positive comments, and you guys always down there helping each other out with questions. Thank you guys for coming and viewing this. And thank you, Jay, for being a part of this with me.
And Michelle, thank you. You've done an amazing job. I'll be back in 2 Thursdays to watch that one. So I'll be in the audience. Maybe I'll throw some comments in there. And thank you for bringing this, because these things are important. And I want to thank everybody out there. Thank you all so much for your time, because that's the biggest thing you can give us.
Exactly. Yes. And like Jay said, 2 weeks, we will be back again with Chris Pulaski. I'm going to practice saying his name multiple times in the mirror before we do this, so I don't mess it up. Same bat time, same bat channel will be here on both YouTube and Facebook. And I keep seeing this question down there. The replays are not on the Get Olympus site. They're actually right here on our Facebook page and on our YouTube page. So you can definitely come check us out there. But yeah, that's all for us tonight. And we just thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Take care. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.